Well, good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. Tonight's topic is going to be on holiness, and all of our Bible verses that we use tonight is going to be on the screen here. So I hope that you can easily follow along. I'm a member of the North Columbus Church of Christ. Our website is scrolling below me. That's northcolumbuschristians.com. And obviously, if you're seeing this from our Facebook page. Please like our Facebook page if you haven't already. And also, I'm uploading these videos to YouTube. And so go look up our YouTube page. That's North Columbus Christians. And please subscribe to that YouTube channel as well. And also, as always, this is a live show. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to leave those. But today, again, we're going to be looking at this idea of holiness. In Romans 12:1, we see where Paul, writing to those in Rome, calls on them to be holy. He says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. So that's a command for us. And there's several of these things in which we ought to be. We ought to be a living sacrifice, acceptable to God. But we see here particularly that he has called us to be holy. Now, what is holiness? And I would reckon that most everybody that watches probably has some idea about what holiness is, or if they don't know the exact technical definition, they understand the concept. And now this is from the Pocket Dictionary of Theological Terms. And holiness is defined as a biblical term, generally meaning to be set apart. And so when you think about that idea, especially with God, who he is what we see here on the screen, that he is ultimately set apart from creation, that the Christian is to be set apart from the world as well, or at least to be different from the world. And Isaiah 6 and verse 3, it says, and one cried to one another, said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of glory. And again, looking at this definition here, that we see clearly that this holiness is a crucial characteristic of God. This is who he is. He is something that is totally different from humanity and the world. Leviticus 20, verses 23 through 26, we see where that God's people, in this instant being the nation of Israel, is called to be holy. And it says, and you shall not walk in the statutes of the nations which I'm casting out before you, for they commit all these things, and therefore I abhor them. But I've said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore distinguish between clean animals and unclean, between unclean birds and clean. And you shall not make yourselves abominable by beast or by bird or by any kind of living thing that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. That you should be mine. So here we see this really a practical application of this holiness, that they were to be separated from the peoples that was among them. They were to have nothing to do with these other peoples, these other nations. But we also see where they were not to have anything to do with certain animals, that there would be clean and unclean animals. They should have nothing to do with the unclean. They should not make themselves abominable, as this passage puts it. And notice he says that he has separated these things from you as unclean. And so again, this idea of separation, being set apart here. And this is for the nation of Israel. We see also, even under the new covenant, that Christians ought to be holy as well. It says, in you, who once were alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now he is reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight, if indeed you continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, became a minister. So Paul writing about Christ and talking about the past conditions of those in Colossae, and really every Christian, that they were once alienated, enemies in their mind by how? By wicked works, by sin. And now he has reconciled them to present to God, them to God as holy. So again, set apart. Why? Because of Christ's death. And they were not only holy, but blameless, above reproach. But we see the condition there that if he can present them to God, or present them as holy, as long as they continue in the faith. If they don't continue, if they're moved away from that hope, then they can no longer have that guarantee of being presented as holy, blameless, and above reproach. And we see and I think it's really implied in the Colossians passage that we just read, that part of this holiness, we understand that it's being set apart, but that we act different as well, is that we're being obedient to Christ. We're being obedient to God. 1 Peter 1, verse 13 through 16, it says, therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, as obedient children, and not conform yourselves to the former lust as in your ignorance, but as he who called you holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. And so what does Peter call on Christians to do? Gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober. We have this idea, again, of soberness. Be careful with what you do. Be alert with what you do. But we see that we are to act as obedient children, not conforming ourselves to the former lust. Again, calling back to their past lives. Don't go about living as the world lives, but we are to be holy in all our conduct. Why? Because God himself is holy. And so because he is holy, he expects his children to be holy as well. And once again, I want to remind everyone that this is again live show. If you have any questions, comments, or if you just don't agree with what I'm saying, feel free to comment. I'll respond to that, and we'll take care of whatever issue we may have. But when you think about this holiness, I think a lot of times people think about that as just being, well, I'm just supposed to be good. I'm supposed to act right, or this moral purity. But there's more to it than just that. The Lexham Bible Dictionary says this. It says, a broad survey of literature from the ancient world suggests that the people of the ancient Near East developed the language of holiness to express membership and proximity to the realm of the divine. Ancient Near Eastern texts generally used the language of holiness in the sense of consecration, referring to the dedication of a person or object to a deity. The sense of moral purity or perfection is absent from this context. And so another little aspect of holiness here, this idea of being near to the divine, that you are consecrated, you are dedicated to a deity, in this case being dedicated to God himself, to Christ. And so we are dedicated to in service to God. And so this is also what holiness looks like, not only doing the right things, being set apart in that, but also dedicating and serving God. And number 6 through 5 through 8, this is, I think, a passage that goes along with this idea of being dedicated or consecrated to God. This is with about the Nazarite vow. And so Samson, if you remember Samson, he was a Nazarite, and this was a law pertaining to them. It says, all the days of the vow of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head until the days are fulfilled, for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother, for his brother or his sister, when they die, because the separation of God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he shall be holy to the Lord. Notice what this separation meant. That he used to be holy. We see in the last part of that passage, but he's to be separated, that he's going to be, even if one of his family members die, he shall not go near that dead body lest he become unclean. And he says, because the separation of God is on his head. So he will not cut his hair. He will let his hair grow long. And it was, symbolic of that separation. And again, we see this kind of idea of dedication or service to God, that they were willing to take this vow, and there was pretty hard requirements here, but they were doing this specifically for God. And Luke 22 and verses 24 through 27, again, thinking about this idea of being in service or dedicated to God, says, now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors, but not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs is he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. And Jesus brings this idea that's really countercultural, that you don't get yourself or put yourself in the position in which you exercise lordship over one another, in which other people are tending to your needs. But yet, what do? You're imitating what Christ did, that Christ came to serve. And so us as Christians ought to serve. And of course, we see that the greatest among them, according to the world, would be the one that exercises the most authority. But in reality, it's the one that serves, that humbles themselves. And so again, this idea of service, not only to Christ, but also to others as well. In Luke chapter 17 and verses 7 through 10, says, and which of you, having a servant plowing or tending sheep, will say to him, when he is coming from the field, come once and sit down to eat? Or will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself, and serve me till I've eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank of that servant because he did the things that were commanded to him? I think not. So likewise you, when you have done all these things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do. So we read previous passages that we ought to be holy, and that means to be set apart to God. That means to be dedicated to God. That means dedicated to service to God. But what ought to be our attitudes in regards to this holiness or service? And Jesus here answers that, and he compares really us, Christians, comparing us to servants. And this master, when he calls this servant to do whatever he wants him to do, he doesn't go and thank this servant. And we see this in the last part of the passage. Does he thank that servant? I think not. And so he's just doing those things that were commanded him, those things in which was expected of him. It's not some really special work that he did. And so for us as Christians, that ought to be our attitude, that even, when we have done those things which we are commanded, well, we don't deserve any special thanks because we were doing what we were supposed to do to begin with. We ought to have the attitude that we are unprofitable servants, as we see here. And so in thinking about, again, this idea of holiness, what's our attitude towards God? What's, in our service towards him? And it'll probably give a good idea of whether or not we're really striving to be holy just as God or Christ is holy. If we're not willing to put our needs behind other people's needs. And so that was a pretty short lesson. Hope that's been useful for those that have watched and those that will watch. And again, if there's any questions, comments, even if there's some topic that you want to be covered here, we certainly love to do those things. Certainly love to talk about the Bible. Also want to mention that the North Columbus Church of Christ, we love visitors as well. We meet Sundays 9, 10, 11 a.m., Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. as well. And even there, we have opportunities to if you have questions or comments pertaining to the lesson. And again, even if you don't agree with what is being said, we certainly would love to learn more about the Bible and learn it from really anybody, as long as you're spreading truth. That's all that matters. And so again, hope this has been useful. This will be uploaded to YouTube. If again, if you want to, hopefully, if somebody is, you think somebody that may be useful for somebody, please show them that link on YouTube. And until then, I'll plan on being here next Sunday at around the same time at 7 p.m. Thanks.